Tenemos el POV.
There is some interesting tech. There's a lot of really good gameplay, and there's a decent amount of interesting strategies that we're actually going to...
Interest Strategies significa que esto lo van a fixear la semana que viene en cuanto la gente se entere. Interesting Strategies es esto está fixeado la semana que viene, echan una jiquicada y está fixed la semana que viene. Y lo nerfean un 7%. Eso, esa palabra me la conozco.
You see from this team formerly known as Astro Y, helmed by Anuo and ZyBB. These are people who won a TGP. So it doesn't really come as a surprise.
Sí, esta gente la conozco. Esta gente son muy buenos, ¿eh? A ver, nombre no sonará. Pero este es Anuo. En Shadowlands lo veíamos mucho aquí, Anuo. No sé si este será Kinchin, pero toda esta gente es conocida, vaya, es conocida. No sonará el nombre porque os suena chino, literal, pero esta gente es muy buena. Esta gente compite en el MTI también, de Great Push y tal.
In Rise is so similar because there's only so much you can realistically pull. But
sí, aquí tienen los pulls muy limitados, efectivamente.
The time you can save in Rise comes in this first area. And how they do this first area is actually kind of insane. It is this most recent week where it's still storming and raging, where, you know, this is probably going to be released after the reset, but it's storming and raging where this first area of trash is a bit dangerous because if you don't end up kicking the sand volley, you can end up wiping. Now there's a question as to how you're supposed to pull these mini bosses. So to get to your spawn, you have to kill Spurlock, the maiden, then you have to kill that ancient guy. And so those are the three components that are actually going to limit whether or not you're able to get the boss pulled.
Y no realmente limita, los hats aquí no limitan. Si estás comunicado, aquí tienes muchos recursos para cortar siempre todas las volleys, porque nunca las tiran a la vez. No sé si os habéis dado cuenta, pero cuando pillas varios magos, el casteo como que se retrasa, se desincroniza para que siempre tengas corte, no los tiran todos a la vez. Entonces siempre se desincroniza y si tienes una hora para ver el CD en el platter, te sale actualizado el CD que les queda y siempre puedes mantener un poco el control de todo. Y luego tienes un DH que tiene 2 siglos de silencio, tienes Fear, tienes Blind, tienes todas las reglas de la Evoker, tienes agitación, tienes el DH también. Realmente los volleys no son un problema en grupos organizados. El tema es cómo pulear los minibosses, en qué orden. Y Spurlock probablemente sea el mejor primero porque así lo matas antes y no tienes que desviar un corte hacia él y luego vas al resto.
And like what's actually going to pull the boss. And so they actually pull Spurlock and the Maiden pretty early on, where I've actually seen a lot of teams going for the Ancient plus the Maiden together, that where you're able to use the shield on the Maiden's AoE. Now the downside is that I think sometimes this actually loses you a decent amount of time.
Sí, pilla al Coranos primero, no sé cómo se llama. No creo que sea buena idea en piedras altas, porque te hace perder mucho tiempo y hace que pierdas DPS en el pool mientras lo tienes que alejar. Yo siempre pienso que es mejor hacer focus a este.
Maiden gets stuck inside of the
siempre pasa que el pool se queda en medio de la burbuja. Siempre pasa.
Now there is some tech that you do see this team doing. They're utilizing this orb as well to so the Maiden, whenever she shoots the orb, it actually does damage to the mobs. And so
eso no lo sabía. El orbe de la Maiden hace daño a los mobs por los que pasa. Qué bueno.
What they're actually going to be doing is they're going to be like pretty much chain pulling this entire area. They're playing a fairly standard composition. They're playing Havoc Demon Hunter, Outlaw Rogue, Disc Priest Archivist.
10% de la vida. 10% de la vida. En cuanto le toca el orbe, mira. Este tío que está al 48. 38 y no había CD de nadie. Wow.
Priest Evoker. Like this is pretty standard. I think that Outlaw Rogue is incredibly powerful.
Arregla el show de moto, no sé por qué no va.
Assassination, but Outlaw is very good, and I think it's kind of going to be shown here, and so we can kind of skip forward. They have like the fastest trash split here I've ever seen. I think they're able to get all of this trash.
No sabía lo de la Maiden,
I mean, look at this.
Wow, saber lo de la Maiden me cambia mucho las cosas.
We're at 3 minutes. It's probably going to be dead by 3:30. Now it is tyrannical, so that's definitely something to factor in whenever you're talking about how fast this trash is being cleared out. These people are booking it, and so this is certainly one of the first things that whenever you're watching this run, you're like, oh wow, okay, so maybe they're actually just completely blasting this key damage-wise.
¿Tú lo sabías? Yo no lo sabía.
So they pull like they're trying to time the key. And now here's the first bit of tech that we're going to show that they did.
Aquí entiendo que van a pillar cosas con TIR para ahorrar tiempo o van a hacer alguna jiquicada para que podrás hacer LOS a la marca que te pone.
And this is probably the largest reason that they timed the key. I don't want to say it's the only reason that they've timed the key, but it is the largest reason they timed the key. And they have turned TIR into a target dummy. And so that saves you, especially in Tyrannical, whenever on Tyrannical, typically he's going to get like 4 shields. I think that's like a pretty standard amount. It's like 3 minimum. It's probably 4 though. But this group of gamers has figured out how to avoid making it use the shield, and it comes down to how the tank buster is going to be affecting the group here, and you're going to see a strat. So Anuo is actually starting off by tanking the boss near the ledge, and you're going to see this wall come up that's preventing players from.
Sí, para que no te salga de la sala, efectivamente.
And So whenever the Tank Buster comes out, I think this is the Tank Buster in 2 seconds here, as you see indicated by Bigwigs.
Sí.
Anuo is going to jump around the wall. And you might ask what this has done. And
Se
so
queda nevade
Tyr at
el
this
boss.
point should be at 50 energy because he cast the Pizza Slice ability and then he casts his Tank Buster. However, whenever Anuo lined the Tank Buster,
Espérate.
and so for the tank, it's preventing players from actually leaving the arena here in a couple seconds. And so whenever the Tank Buster
No
comes
gasta
out, I think
energía porque
this
no le
Tank
entra
Buster
el
in 2
golpe al
seconds here,
tanque,
as
¿no?
you see indicated by Bigwigs, Anuo is going to jump around the wall.
Porque
And
no,
you might
no
ask what
pilla
this
el
has done.
target y no le baja
And so
energía.
Tyr at this point should be at 50 energy because he cast the Pizza Slice ability and then he casts his Tank Buster. However, whenever Anuo lined the Tank Buster, it didn't drop his energy, but it caused him to sequence into the fact that he only casts 4 abilities, right? He's not going to sequence into another ability here. And so by canceling it, now Tyr is stuck at 25 energy.
Y no,
And this is a
no
big
se pone
deal.
a canalizar
And so
energía.
now Tyr is literally just a training dummy. For all intents and purposes. And I kind of expect this to get fixed relatively.
Semana que viene fixeado, chicos. Vale, o sea que, vamos, lo único que tienen que cambiar es que Tyr, independientemente de la situación, aunque no esté a 0 de energía, canalice para pillar energía. Porque, a ver, va por timer esto, ¿no? Pero realmente el boss lo que hace es que le cuesta energía tirar habilidades y cuando se queda sin energía, canaliza el centro para pillar energía. Pero claro, aquí se supone que lo tendría que hacer porque le toca, pero parece que espera tener 0 de energía y parece que no tienen cola más habilidades, solamente tienen cola 4 habilidades.
Soon.
Buah, pero el boss
Tyr
está
is
regalado.
a training dummy for all
Cojones,
intents and
está
purposes.
regalado el boss. Es que no hace
This
nada
is
ya.
one of the
Puro
biggest
autoataque, ¿no?
things that allowed this group to be able
Puro
to time
autoataque,
I
claro.
wouldn't say it's the only thing because these people are going to play really well and we're going to see like some of the remaining stuff. Like the sand area, you know, that's mostly standard, but some of the stuff that they did on Battlefield's kind of interesting. But this is a massive time
No,
save.
eso te
So you
ahorra
need
3
to be coming
minutos,
off this
tranquilamente.
boss
3
probably
minutos.
around the 8-minute mark to be able to time the key, which for pretty much everybody else in the world, like damage-wise right
Wow.
now, it's not necessarily doable on a 28 unless you do this to Tyr. Because Tyr has so many shields on himself on Tyrannical, this dungeon is the hardest dungeon
Tiene
of the
escudos.
season. It's like what we were talking
Y
about
aparte,
earlier.
voy a poner los subtítulos por si no lo está entendiendo. Tiene escudos y tiene tiempo en el que no le puedes pegar, aunque luego te dejaste, pero estás perdiendo time.
Now, whenever you do this strategy where you've completely bugged the boss out, now you're able to come off the boss at around the 8-minute mark. These people are actually even coming off it a
3
bit
minutos y medio el
earlier
boss.
even.
Es que lo que he
It's
dicho, 3 minutos y medio.
7:45. Yeah, so 7:45 mark is when they're finishing their first boss. And that's well below the time that you need to be able to time the key. Now you just basically need a clean run for the remainder of the key. And so we can kind of pan through. Again, a lot of the stuff in Rise is very straightforward, which is why this timer is so incredibly tight, because the bosses
No puedes
are
equipar cosas, hay muchos minibosses. Sí.
pretty dangerous. You know, the fight itself is relatively scripted, and so there's only so much innovation you can necessarily do. Looks like the bot is lagging. So they're making their way through the sand area. They're avoiding deaths. I mean, this is a pretty big deal. You try to aggressively pull the sand area. You're going to do this by... they're going to have like the disc priest actually activating and pulling every single one of those time swarm anomalies as often as they can. I mean, we can probably back up and just like watch kind of like how loosely how they pull
¿Qué
it.
se
I think they
refiere con
pull
que
it
el
on the left side.
DC pule los magos o que pule
Just
los
from
otros
memory,
chicos?
then
No estoy
they
entendiendo.
circled all the way to the right. So they start off by in the middle, but then they book it to this,
Van para la
this
izquierda,
left-hand
luego
side
para la
because
derecha,
there's
sí.
2 of the
Porque aquí hay dos
those keeper
juntos.
mobs that are over there, and so that actually allows them to be able to kind of constantly chain, or at least you want to ideally be in combat with one at any given moment. Now they actually kind of mess up and they actually lose some time here. Ideally, you're in combat with this mob right here. They probably lose about 30 seconds, I would say, by not maintaining combat with one of those mobs. But anyways, yeah, so they hook up the left side and then they cut across. I don't think that there's like a
Sí, eso
special
es muy
strat
normal.
for
Grupo
that yet.
organizado que él te pule el rango.
I think that we've seen some groups go straight up the middle and then cook left and then cook right. Not like a huge deal. There's not like much time to be saved as long as you're constantly staying in combat. Now, another thing that they do on Morchi, and something that you see actually a decent amount of high-end groups do, is they're going to constantly leave the familiar faces mobs CC'd the entire time. And so they're going
Nunca
to rotate
meterlo a la
things such
trampa.
as AoE Blind. They're going to rotate things such as Sigil of Misery.
Misery.
They're going to rotate into Landslide Stun as well. Or
Esto
not
sería lo
Landslide,
suyo, que todo el mundo
Landslide
baitease
Root. And
juntos, sí.
those things by itself should
Y
be
dejarlos
enough.
en el centro,
All
sería- eso es
four of those
increíble.
CCs. So
Pero claro,
what
esto
you're
con
gonna do is
Puso no
you're
lo
gonna go
haces.
like landslide into AoE blind, and then
Mira,
you're probably gonna go
dos
like
quietecitos.
misery into misery. And it's because like the familiar faces, like you don't have enough duration. It's like on a 45-second cadence, and so you're going to actually have to CC them over time. And like you see right here, Anuo
That's
chains us into misery, and then right as this misery is going to expire, he's going to just like refresh it. And so that's like not a huge deal. So that actually saves them
El
a decent
DPS
amount of
lleva
time because
Misery.
they're not running around.
Es como
I
de
think that,
llevar
like, a big
sigilo de
thing is,
miseria
like,
con el DH. DPS.
a lot of melee
Es incómodo.
have a high degree of likelihood of losing a lot of uptime with the familiar faces just in general. And by doing this strategy very specifically, it saves them a lot of melee uptime just as a whole. And so that's going to save them a lot of boss damage, which was super relevant,
Solamente te alejas al
for the
principio y
remainder
luego
of the queue.
tienes los melee
Now the
pueden
hard
pegar
part of
gratis.
the,
Claro.
the remainder of the dungeon's battlefield. So you see they're pulling around their lust timing. Whenever they were leaving the Morchi area and walking to the battlefield area, they only had 30 seconds left on their lust. So typically, hold on, I'm gonna pause for a second. Typically the lust timings in this dungeon are first pull, double dragon, battlefield, and then like bottom 10% of Iridicron. And what they have done here is they've passed this
Ya, el
out so
detail de los
perfectly
chinos,
that they are basically getting
multiplícalo por 10. 338k, 335k. Multiplícalo por 10.
optimal lusts. So they're going to be holding it for a little bit, but as long as you don't go over the 34-minute threshold before you press your lust, you're mostly fine. You can even go up to 30, 35, 10 before pressing it, and you're going to technically get one. You don't really want it to be like that. Like, you never really want it that close. But
Está aplicando lo de los BL. Que uno es el primer pool, otro es el pool de los dos dragones antes de entrar en las arenas, otros aquí en Battlefield y el último para la última parte de ellos.
25-10 mark before pressing your lust is because you want to be able to like sync your offensive CDs later on. Though VOD's lagging again, this is tragic. But anyways, yeah, so Battlefield is up next. And how they tank this boss is a bit weird. I actually prefer tanking this boss on the edge. That way you can bait the shockwaves like completely off the edge to not buff up the boss.
Claro, porque lo hace en el centro.
In the middle of the room.
Porque en el centro, si aquí va a matar a más hats, ¿no? ¿Por qué?
Which is kind of interesting, and they end up baiting shockwaves in kind of a weird way, but it ends up buffing up the boss a lot.
Claro, es que lo buffa un montón.
So
Gana un montón de
they have 4
stacks.
stacks as a return to victory cast, and they have 5 stacks even, and so they're actually taking a ton of
Mira.
blasts. IBB even dies on this boss.
Hostia, no sé por qué lo ponen en el centro, la verdad. Lo veo raro.
How they tank it? I think it's probably fine.
Entiendo que ganas por los ads, pero pierdes porque hay mucho daño en el boss. En plan, para que no lo sepa, el boss, cuando tira habilidades, esta habilidad, si mata a ads, ¿vale? Esto es horda. Pues si mata a Alice, gana el bufo de que, la mano aquí, que su autoataque explota en área. Si lo pones en el centro, cabrón, va a matarlo todo con los frontales. Por eso se suele hacer en el borde y batalla en el borde. Es que mira todas las muertes que está viendo. No sé yo hasta qué punto.
Like this is it's easy to get the ads grouped up. So
claro,
if you
los
don't
ads.
have like a blood DK or something like that, if the archer spawns far, it's going to be really annoying to be able to even get it grouped up.
Se ha muerto todo el mundo, sí.
Sí. I don't know how they come back from this. This is actually insane. I haven't seen.
Sí, es que han whipeado casi entero.
The part of the boss, but like I didn't realize that they like almost full wiped here. So this is kind of why tanking it in the middle is okay, because whenever you get the archer, you're actually able to get that sigil of chains on those mobs and you get them grouped up faster. The downside is that you actually get a lot more stacks on the boss and have a high degree of likelihood of people dying. And so that's I don't love this strat that they're doing.
Yo esto no lo haría.
Mostly because I think it's actually very dangerous for whenever.
Salvo que el Gel me lo dijese, pero si no, no lo haría. Eso me lo tiene que decir el Gel, tipo, me lo curo. Pero vamos.
You had ZyBB
no
and
confío.
their Priest Healer go down. They had to like NG res them, and like that's pretty sketch with this composition. They're gonna have to be like talenting into Bracer res and stuff like that to be able to even get them up. Now, I don't love that. I think that's like pretty bad. But the upsides of it being able to get the mobs grouped up faster, being able to chains the mobs on top of the pack before you blow up the archer, not letting any of the serrated casts go off. I mean, that's like
probablemente otro Gel lo tuviese más sencillo que un Priest, también te digo.
Those were most of the...
Tipo un Monk, un Druida hubiese tenido mucha más facilidad para poder mantener el grupo vivo que un DC aquí. Porque el daño es muy inesperado, depende de si le entra el autoataque o no le entra el autoataque. Depende de si el DH lo esquiva o no. Pero también otra cosa muy buena, el DH tiene mucha esquiva, ¿sabes?
Unique things that I actually saw from this run. The remainder of the run is fairly standard. Iridicron is actually very scary at this level. Now, at a high level on Iridicron, I don't think this is going to be super relevant for a lot of people. But at a high level of Iridicron, once you kill off all the ads, you need to make sure that your movement around the room is pretty much perfect, because the sands will despawn, but it only despawns on like 2.5 minute intervals, and so you need to make like a perfect circle around the room, and you need to make sure that you're baiting the previous gunk up against the old gunk. Beyond that, it's kind of about making sure that you're able to kill off these ads. Now, if you're playing with a Priest Healer and say they have Massive Spell, this mob is pretty trivial. The mob actually puts a dot onto players that's spellable. The ads here, these keepers.
Sí, lo de los portales.
And, that dot, especially at a high level tyrannical, is insane. Like you
sí.
we've had problems.
Además, es muy loco porque el dot empieza muy fuerte y luego baja, con lo cual la vida te la deja a 3/4.
Like we play the rest
Super
of the
rápido.
sometimes, and we had problems like where if we had 2 of them out and there's like a set with 2, it is near death for the person who has the dot, and this is this dot that's being cast right here, whatever that sans dot is, that you see immediately getting dispelled. But they do have a priest healer, so the difficulty that's pretty much negated. Overall though, that was
Wow.
Anuo and ZyBB and Astra.
Una buena key, eh?
Astra Wise, 28 Rise. I thought it would be actually kind of interesting to look at some of the stuff that they did in this key and kind of talk through why they were making some of the decisions they were going to. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. I mean, this is a bit more nerdy and in-depth than some of the content I release. I normally like release like tip videos that are a bit more practical.
A ver,
like,
lo que pasa es que esto lo van a fixear muy rápido. Lo de tiro lo van a fixear instantáneo, vamos. Instantáneo. Semana que viene esto está fixed, turbo fixed, ahora que la gente la ha empezado a ver. 100%. Pero muy bien pensado, la verdad. Lo de cancelarle cast para que no gaste energía. Muy bien pensado. Estas son las cosas guapas del WoW, ¿sabes? Todas las cosas que puedes hacer, tío. Está guapo. ¿Qué pasa en ti? Chavales, si habéis llegado tarde lo habéis perdido, tío. Pero básicamente Tyr no hace nada. Se queda pegando autos. No hace nada. Solamente pega autos, ¿ves? Puro autoataque. No hace nada. No tiene fases. Le cancela las fases, saltando fuera. ¿Cuánta vida tiene, por cierto, el boss? ¿1,3 billones? No, pero esto por 10, ¿no? Claro, esto es 1.578.000. Esto es 130 millones de vida. Hostia, qué gracioso, ¿no? Es que hasta Chromie tiene menos vida, vaya. Hasta Chromie tiene menos. Qué barbaridad.